This is a cruel proposition. I come here for 20 minutes, I see old friends, and I have to leave, which sets a time limit. But it's very good to see you, Eli Isakov, again, and Moti Gantz, Valderschein, and also Mr. Penny. Welcome. You're in the diamond business, but you're in the business of business. And it has changed rapidly everywhere in the world. It will change more rapidly, a lot more rapidly in the coming years. Now, this is a difficult proposition for politicians to understand. They're the last to understand it. And the public only follows them, especially publics in well-established countries. They don't really get economic changes until it hits them in the head. They have social welfare bills to protect them, pensions that go bankrupt, but they don't know about it. And this was our situation here 4 years ago when I took over. We knew finally that something was wrong because our economy was on the verge of an Argentinian-style collapse. Is there anyone from Argentina? You remember. We were 6 weeks away from a general collapse. We couldn't raise a penny in foreign markets for years. In fact, the international bankers were kind enough to tell us, don't ask so the word doesn't get around that we refused to give you credit. We were skyrocketing in unemployment. A major bank was rumored to be about to tank, to go under, which would have taken the entire banking system with it, and with it the savings of millions of Israelis, and so on and so on and so on. Our GDP was actually shrinking for 2 successive years, and we were on the verge of disaster. Now, if you ask people at the time, what is the explanation for this malaise, they would tell you that the reason the Israeli economy was where it was because the NASDAQ bubble had burst in 2001 and in 2000. And you remember, of course, that Israel's high-tech sector is a very important component of the economy. So that was a plausible explanation. And the second one was that we had, evidently, an intifada, cascading terror and suicide bombers. Undeniably, that hurt the economy. And that was the common explanation. So people said, well, if you restore security, certainly if you move towards peace, you'll restore growth and prosperity. And if the NASDAQ recovers, everything will be fine. I thought that these would be contributing factors, obviously, to get out of the crisis. But I didn't think that this was the source of our predicament. I didn't think this was an explanation to our failures at the time, or to the absence of these things, an explanation to the success of other countries. I knew that was the case because I was looking at what other countries were doing, what they had done before the NASDAQ bubble burst, before the Intifada began, before, say, March 2000. I could see that countries that had been behind us had overtaken us like that. They had been behind us 10, 15, 20 years earlier in GDP per capita, and they had shot right through us and climbed up the mountain, well before any of these explanations could possibly be put in place. A country, for example, which country? Give me an example. They always come up with Ireland first. Yeah, of course, Ireland, but that's an easy one. How about Spain? Remember Spain? That hub of high technology and science? You're not laughing. It is a great, but it doesn't exceed our capacities in high tech. But Spain, that was behind us, had overtaken us. We were at $17,000 per capita income, and they were $24,000. 15 years before, they were well behind us. Ireland more than doubled, nearly quadrupled its per capita income. They were up to $34,000. Why? That happened before the NASDAQ collapse. Now, to answer that and to give a direction to the country, I had to fall back on an image that many people understand because most people here go to the army. And I fell back on my first day in basic training. They had put us on a straight line, and they said, we're going to do a special race. It's called an elephant race. And I was the first man on the line. They said, look to your right and put the man next to you. He was a fairly about size. The next guy was the smallest man in the platoon, and they said, put the guy next to you on his shoulders, and he did. and he got the biggest guy in the platoon. The third guy was a big guy, he got a small guy, and so on. And then the commander blew the whistle. I managed to take a few steps, very hard. The small guy next to me just collapsed. And the third guy shot forward and took the race, like a rocket. I said in the international economy, all national economies are pairs of a public sector sitting on the shoulders of a private sector. In our case, the guy at the top got very fat. The public sector got exceedingly fat. It was close to 60% of GDP. Just for comparison, the OECD average is 41%. Even if you took out defense, we were exceedingly top-heavy. And so we were about to collapse, just like that little guy next to me. So what we had to do was evident. We had to go on a very stringent diet, have the fat man go on a very stringent diet, something politicians really don't like to do. You really don't want to cut government budgets if you're a politician. I know the politicians in your country are different, right? But that's hard. It's very hard, but essential. And the second thing you have to do is put a lot of oxygen. You have to make the guy at the bottom very fit. Put him on a treadmill. He has to really increase his lung capacity and his endurance. And how do you give oxygen to the private sector? What are the three things you really have to do? You don't know? Of course you know. The first thing is cut taxes. The second thing is cut taxes. The third thing is cut taxes. Fourth, fifth, and fifth, sixth. By the time you get to 7, you get something else. But you have to cut taxes. Because that's why people do business. They want to retain, as workers or as investors, they want to retain, or as managers, they want to retain the majority of their product for themselves. They don't want to give it to the government. So the lower the taxes, the more oxygen, the more incentive. Right? That's a difficult proposition to take because most people think that if you cut the tax rates, you're going to end up with less money for social welfare. The opposite happened here. So now, we took the fat man on a diet. We gave a lot of oxygen to the guy at the bottom. We're ready to go, right? Wrong. You're not going to get very far because you want to start running. The thin man wants to start running, and he's very fit. Lungs full of oxygen, and he's running, but he meets a wall. It stops him. He passes that wall. There's another obstacle, a fence. It stops him. He goes through another one. There are 3 guys standing and saying, you can't go through here. Basically, these barriers to competition prevent even a low-tax, low-government spending economy from moving. If you have barriers to competition, if you have monopolies, if you have bureaucratic hurdles that you have to cross, you're depriving your economy of growth. So the 3 things you have to do in any economy, it doesn't make a difference if it's South Africa, if it's France, my favorite country to talk about, because it now has hope. I'm nonpartisan, by the way. Every government would have to do it. That's the whole point. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. The reason Ireland beat everywhere else, the rest of the world, is because governments change. Conservatives, socialists, or social democrats, whatever. They adopted the same program, and for the last 20 years, they're doing exactly the same thing, and they beat everyone else because you have to lower taxes, drive down spending, and remove barriers to competition. Now, what I said is conceptually easy, not for politicians, but conceptually easy for business people to understand. But for politicians, it is very, very hard to implement because there are vested interests everywhere. I gave you one example. Even to lower taxes was hard here because people were convinced that the social welfare money, which is a product of tax money, would be diminished if we lower the tax rates. And no matter how much you argue that if you're a high-tax company and you lower the tax rates, you increase tax revenues. People don't understand it. Economics is not an intuitive science. It is counterintuitive. Most of the economic concepts that are central for economic policy are counterintuitive. They're not understood by the public. The public is easily seduced by social welfare arguments, which are wrong and which sustain poverty. For example, the idea that the way that you benefit people is you give them welfare. This is a way to ensure that poverty is enshrined generationally. So the major tasks facing the politicians in every one of your countries is to realize they're in the global elephant race. They have no choice. They either reform their economies now at tolerable cost or reform them later after collapse. What happened now in France is that the public understood that they must have economic reform immediately because they could not sustain their standard of living on 1% growth. We went from minus 1.5, nearly minus 2% growth in 2002 to plus 6 right before the Lebanon war. We're down to 5. We went roughly a 8% switch. When we began this program 4 years ago, I tried to get a group of investors together, and all I could garner was 6 European investors, and I said, you really should invest in this country. And they said, why? You have the NASDAQ collapse and terror. And I said, well, we'll take care of that. And then I said what I just said to you now, that this is what we're going to do. And I think about 15 minutes into this, they said, this guy's meshugana enough, that's crazy enough, to do this. So then they said, okay, so tell us what to invest in. And I said, listen, I don't do stock tips. I'm the finance minister. I can't do stock tips. They said, no, tell us what to invest in. And I said, that's for you to decide. You're the business people, look around and choose a company. But I'm telling you that whatever company you choose, the rising tide will take everyone. And of course, they weren't satisfied with that. And they pressed and pressed and pressed. And I said, all right, invest in the Tel Aviv 100, in the stock index. And they said, oh. They didn't. It's about to quadruple. Okay? It's about to quadruple. Now, my point is not merely that you don't have a choice, that you have to do this, otherwise you fall behind in the race, but that if you do it, the rewards are immense. Globalization gives every economy, it doesn't make any difference if it's Asian or Middle Eastern or African, it gives every country an immense opportunity, especially small countries, an enormous opportunity to better themselves and to partake of a growing pie. The central observation that is absent in politics is the principal function of economic policy is to increase the pie and not to divide it. If you increase, it divides pretty well, contrary to common conception. The way you can increase create a more equitable division is through education, more than anything else. But not through taxation policies, extreme taxation policies, which will shrink the pie. So this is the opportunity that now faces every country. And in order to do it, you need leaders who will give you vision, who will amass sufficient political power to drive the vision home, and still they need courage. They need courage because no matter what you do, you'll be hit. You're always going to fight against vested interests. And if you have that courage, you might succeed and you might fail, but if you don't try, you'll never know. And this is true of every country. I know Moti was talking to me about Africa. Africa could extricate itself very rapidly, not with foreign aid. It could extricate itself very rapidly if it had market economies established. No amount of aid would even begin to approach the benefits of rapid shifts towards a market economy. I know that you don't control those politics, and I know that a lot of obstacles stand in the way. The most important obstacle that stands in the way of free economies is corruption and the lack of law and contract. The complement to what I just described requires that you have a reasonable conviction in a transaction, in an economic transaction, that it's honest and that it will be maintained. So the complement to free economies is the rule of law, or relative rule of law, if one can speak in those terms, because this is not an absolute scale. To the extent that you have government that actually enforces market contracts, that a deal is a deal, that an arrangement holds and is not thwarted either by government officials who are taking their cut or by the force of arms. or the force of intimidation. That is a necessary precondition, an insufficient one, but necessary. The second one is the shift to market economies. Having said that, I think that the race is already engaged. The Asians have already taken off. Vietnam will come now as the third great Asian power, and many, many other countries will join. Israel, to the extent that I have anything to do with it, I may very well have, it depends on the voters here, will go for another 40 reforms. We instituted 40, we have another 40. Since you're here, I'll make a pitch. I think you should invest here. If you believe what I just said, and you believe there's a chance that we'll continue to implement these policies, this means that everything that you see around you is undervalued. I'm giving you exactly the same pitch I gave 4 years ago to European investors. Specifically, I intend to move to make Israel the diamond center that, for example, Antwerp was, and that the Gulf states are becoming. There's no reason why they should have any advantage on us. We have remarkable people here. They understand this industry as no one else, no one else understands it better than they do. And I think this could be a world center. This means that we have to make sure that bureaucratic hurdles are minimized even more, and that tax policies are a lot more favorable than they've been up to now. I'm speaking specifically of the diamond industry because I intend to get every last person in Antwerp to come to Israel. Some, not only Jews, Indians too, you know that. And we intend to give the Gulf a real race. I think we have things they don't have. And this is something that we're committed to. So I hope that the next time that you invite me, I can tell you about specific policies and specific steps that we take to make sure that we get more of your business. By the way, non-Indians are also invited, I want you to know. It is absolutely possible to make Israel the diamond center of the world. Not many minds, but a lot of minds with a D. And I look forward to engaging you in the future on this. Thank you very much, and good luck.